as an aside, to the men out there, right, specifically, yeah, and specifically men of particular ethnicities and backgrounds, you need to understand that there is a thing called misandry, right? And it's not exactly the opposite of misogyny, but it's similar, right? You need to understand that that exists, right? And it's deeply embedded in our culture and our society as much as misogyny is, right? But particularly why it's important, right? And why there are scholars and doctors out there on the internet you can find now, right? People like Tommy Robinson, T.S.on Johnson, and Green Gorilla, people like this, building the vocabulary of this understanding, right? It's because of this, one of the most potent things. Men of particular ethnicities and backgrounds are more susceptible to proxy violence, right? The use of the state, the use of the police force and these individual bodies and powers against the body of you, a male, or particularly a black male, right? And it's always been there. It's less overt now than it was, but it's always been there. And a great example of that would be something like Emmett Till, right? The use of this white woman saying, hey, this little black boy did something to me, and now she can round up the powers that be, yeah, to come and get you, the little black boy, and do whatever they want to do to you and justify it, right? That is use of proximity. That is violence by proximity, right? She doesn't have to carry out the violence on you herself, right? She can get it done to you, right? So you must be aware of that. And it's particularly more prominent today with things like Me Too, right? Where you can accuse somebody of something and have them ruined by proximity, yeah? Have violence done on their career or to them directly by a police force or a group of, let's say, simps, right? You can use that, right? That is there. That's a real thing, right? And it's not to say women lie, because not all women lie, right? But it's something you must be aware of, right? And of course, there are lots of fear mongers online that will have you living in a state of fear of having relationships and conversations with women because of this thing that can happen. But if you're unaware of it, you don't know what to look for, right? And you don't know what to be aware of. Now, this is of particular significance when it comes to interracial relationships, right? Because that old propaganda and indoctrination is still very deeply ingrained in white society, right? The whole idea of King Kong on the tower with the white woman in his hand is really ingrained in a lot of people's psyches, right? And you see that reproduced with things like a magazine cover with LeBron James, one of the most tallest, powerful basketball players of all time, with a white woman in one arm and a ball in another, right? Even though he's not married to the white woman, it's the same image as King Kong with the white woman on the tower, right? Because that's so ingrained in society and in white males in particular, and Asian males, right? They're not. Don't ever think for a second that they're not part of that same group, right? Because it's so ingrained in them, their unjustified fear of black people, right? Black males particularly, you will find they are the perpetrators of violence by proximity for these women, right? And particularly interracial dating women, right? Because there's never going to be an objective view of the situation, right? People, lawyers, judges, police officers, care workers, everybody, right? Psychologists all come into their business, their place of work with preconceived notions of who people are and what they do based on their indoctrination growing up, right? And they cannot avoid that bias, right? Some people are willing enough to educate themselves and understand that they are moving from a place of bias and not from a place of biasness in the wokey way, like, oh, you have privilege. Yes, you do have privilege. We all have our own privileges, right? But because the system is so built on that biasness, it's deeply ingrained racism. Black men in particular, right, will always be at risk of proxy violence by the whistle of a woman, right? And it could be someone you once loved, and it could be someone you care about deeply, right? But because the idea is so ingrained, it will potentially backfire on you, right? So it's something you have to be aware of and be willing to accept as you take a risk in loving and trusting somebody, right? Straight out the gate, right? And to, as an aside, a spring off of that, right? That is not, what I'm about to say is not an excuse, right? But is an understanding why black men in particular can never really be racist, right? Because they are the most mixed in group of all the other races, right? But yet they don't have the political or the systematic power to affect change and actually block or disregard the lives or well-being of another people based solely on their color, right? A prejudice, right? That doesn't work, right? A black person doesn't have the power to be racist, right? They have the power to be prejudiced, right? And that's a different thing. Like I'm saying before, I'm not a professional, and I'm speaking on this in a very nuanced, surface level point of view with my own biases and skepticism, right? But it's something you must understand. It's real and it's out there, right? And the information, if you want to try and get away from your biases and be more centered, you can go and learn and find out if you care, right? But if you're someone of that ethnicity that is watching me now, it's something you should be aware of, right? I'm not telling you to be in fear of it or anything like that. I'm telling you just to be aware of it, right? Because you can easily end up being green mild if you're not paying attention, right? Okay?